that about 1% of abortions in Canada occur after the point of viability.
0.4, I think.
The statistic that was reported in the Record a week or so ago was 1%.
So a very small number.
What I would say, that's the point I was just to arrive at. Margaret Somerville reports from her review of Statistics Canada records that are available, and they're not all available, is that at least 400 children a year get past that point and are the subject of abortions. Mm-hmm. So it is a question of whether you think 400 is a small number, I guess.
Okay, well, when you put it into that perspective.
And I don't. But regardless of that, you know, it's not really just about the question of abortion. It's about whether in Canada I can somehow, if I can convince enough people to say that brunettes are not human beings, that we should pass such a law, even though it's got no basis in biological fact. And that's just wrong, in my view.
So are you willing to, like, what comes next? A private member's bill on this? Do you have the support of Parliament? Do you have the support of Canadian people, do you think, to go ahead with this?
Yeah, I guess I don't know what support there may be. I have an opportunity to propose some kind of private member's business, either a bill or a motion. I'm leaning in the direction of doing something like that in relation to this matter, and I have to make a decision by the end of this month.
And essentially then abortion would then, with any implications, would have to be regulated, would have to become criminalized. No. Then if the fetuses were to be deemed, though, human, and would that not open that kind of can of worms, though?
It certainly means it's a different conversation. If you're talking about abortion in the sense of a child who is not a human being, it's one conversation. If you're talking about abortion in the sense of a child who is a human being, it's a different conversation. But it doesn't resolve the abortion issue, because the interests of the child and the interests of the mother are still both engaged, and it might well be that we would end up at a position where the interests of the mother are deemed to be superior to the interests of the child. What I know is
it's not a black and white issue ever, is it going to be?
But what is black and white is that if there is a conflict of interest between people, you don't resolve it by saying one person is a human being and one person is not. You recognize they're both human beings, and then you weigh those interests appropriately.
So from conception to full birth, that would be deemed as a human being?
Well, not necessarily that either. And in fact, I've asked, or I've suggested that Parliament should call evidence and get some medical information, inform itself appropriately in order to come to grips with that question. Okay,
well, I'm sure this is an issue we'll be hearing more of. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Do stay with us. Again, if you'd like to get involved in this conversation, 519-893-6905 is our phone number. We're on Twitter as well at TalkLocalWR. You can email us to talklocal@rogers.com. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back right after this. Hi, welcome back to Talk Local. Thank you for joining us. In studio now we have Professor Melanie Banks, who's a philosophy professor at Laurier University. And Melanie, thank you for your time this evening. Now, as a philosophy professor and someone who deals with medical ethics, what's your take on Mr. Woodworth's plan to examine this law? What's your thoughts? I mean, is there any merit to this? Is this taken very literally?
Well, I have a lot of sort of questions about what this new medical evidence is going to be that's going to change what we know about the fetus. And one of the issues that comes up with me with what he's proposing is this idea of sort of the personhood of the fetus being different based on the medical knowledge that we now have. However, what we know medically about a fetus is more medical stuff about a fetus, you know, what it looks like, what's going on with the fetus. But there isn't a test for personhood that you can do in medicine. Mm-hmm. It can tell us a lot about the fetus, but we as a society we do determine what the conditions for personhood are. Mm-hmm. And so I just don't really know what it is, what kind of test, blood test or litmus test, what kind of test we could possibly do on a fetus in order to answer the questions that he's asking. Mm-hmm. I find that quite confusing, to be honest.
And he was using the word before, not tonight, but in prior releases, that fetuses were considered subhuman until the moment of complete birth. I mean, does this make any sense? Is this an outdated way of thinking? And to take that law so literally, that the baby could still be inside, but then, it's almost like something could happen to it and then it wouldn't be protected.
Well, one thing, a fetus is, of course, protected because a woman has rights, and so it is protected in that way. So to make the claim that there is no protection for a fetus isn't really true. There is protection. The woman is protected and is a full legal person, and in that way, the fetus is protected
unless
as well.
She decides to.
Yes, and if that's what we're talking about, then we are talking about the abortion debate.
Right.
But if we're not talking about the abortion debate,
well,
then I become more confused.
One leads to another, does it not?
It does seem to be the case. There are a lot of language things, and I see how in the law, the way they're using the word human being, it's difficult because in medicine, human being it's a class, right? You're human or you're a dog or you're a fish. Mm-hmm. And in that way, no one's debating whether or not the fetus is human. It's not a fish, it's a human.
Right.
Personhood and legal personhood, which is what the criminal code is talking about, has to do with something else. Mm-hmm. Legal persons are held accountable under the law and they're given rights under the law. Mm-hmm. Children aren't given full rights, adults are.
Right.
And so it wouldn't make sense to give a fetus full moral or legal rights.
There's no cognitive behavior ability.
No.
Right.
You can't hold them responsible. It
right.
can't defraud you. Your fetus can't defraud you, and you can't hold them. It doesn't make any sense. You would never apply that to a fetus anyway, and this is just where all these questions become quite confusing. Mm-hmm. If we're not talking about the typical abortion debate.
Right. So is there a difference then between, let's say, a 3-week-old fetus and an 8.5-month-old in terms of moral, ethics, medical, kind of everything that surrounds this debate?
I mean, there's definitely a difference in terms of what's going on with the fetus. I mean, there's no debate there, right? Mm-hmm. More development has occurred.
But let's talk a little bit more ethics and medically.
Yeah.
If you were to terminate, if something were to happen, if we're hearing that the Canadian Medical Association says, up to 20 weeks is okay, 8.5 months is not okay.
Well, I mean, and there's going to be a big difference in how the fetus is perceived by the parents during that stage as well. And there's a reason why most abortions, and I don't know the numbers, but most abortions are occurring before that time and not after that time. And that has to do with their own perception of when it's appropriate. So that makes a certain amount of sense to me. But once again, like the moral abilities of the fetus doesn't have moral abilities. It can't participate in our community, and it definitely can't do so independently of the woman that it happens to be inside of, right? That unique independent relationship. So it's not different in that sense. I think there are a lot of issues that we should be looking at in terms of why people are seeking abortions at later stages and what's going wrong. And I would love to have a debate in Canada where we looked at why people wanted abortions and whether or not that was something we could address. Has something gone wrong?
Okay.
As opposed to criminalizing it, which doesn't make any sense. It just seems like an attack against women to me.
Okay. And that goes to the point, I think it was our earlier caller, Ben, I believe his name was, that mentioned, government, parliament mostly made up of men. So should men have a choice, a decision over what a woman does with her body?
I mean, you want to say no, and that's sort of the first thing that comes to mind, of course. But I mean, if they're trying to do what's best for Canadian citizens and if they are truly representing the population, then in a way they should be. But I don't think that is what's best for women. And so I don't think that's what's motivating them or would be motivating the law or the press release that's gone out. I don't think that's what was motivating
What is the motivation here?
I can't think of anything other than to open the abortion debate, because the only time that we become really concerned about the rights of the fetus is when we're trying to pit them against the rights of the mother. Otherwise, the fetus is already protected, and the debate just seems like we have better things to debate.
Okay.
Politically.
Okay. We do have another email, so we're going to put that up on the screen so you can read it at home. And it reads, just wondering how anyone can say we should shut down debate on any subject in a democratic country. I wasn't even old enough to vote in 1988 when the abortion law was struck down by the Supreme Court. Who is anyone to say just because older people debated the issue, no one else can touch it now? In Joe. So thank you, Joe, for the email there. So obviously someone that wants to reopen. And again, we do live in a free society, right? So this is the point, and to open and to touch on such debates. But then I wonder with that, if we're in a free society and then we're taking away someone's rights, like let's say we took away a woman's rights to choose, how does that balance?
And I don't think it does very well. And it's not even that, it's that by focusing on this debate that we've had before, we neglect to look at debates that we should be having now. There are other things that we can talk about when it comes to reproductive rights that are happening now, that are new issues. When you talk about the prenatal diagnosis of a variety of different diseases and whether or not we should abort under those circumstances. That's what we should talk about right now. We shouldn't keep going back over and over again to a debate that we've already had and ignore the really important issues that are happening now. And when I teach medical ethics, that's really the impression I get from my students as well. They're more interested in these new issues than continuing to talk about the older issues.
Okay, that's an interesting point to make. Thank you. Melanie will stay with us. We just need to take a quick break. Again, if you'd like to get involved in the conversation, we do appreciate your feedback. We've had a couple emails already. We've had a phone call. Keep them coming. 519-893-6905 is our phone number. Email as well. I mentioned talklocal@rogers.com. We're on Twitter as well @talklocalwr. We will continue on with this conversation right after the break. We'll be right back.